And welcome back. You're watching Cheche. Finally, to our panelists, we are talking about bridging the gap, and we saw what the president said yesterday. NASA also says there's need to talk. But of course, we're back whether there should be talks about the electoral process or not. The president said very clearly the electoral process is over. So from where you sit or stand or whatever, what do you think should be the structure of talks? What kind of talks should be there, and what is the best way to heal or to bridge the gap? I'll start with you.
I think talking is necessary. But
How?
as I said, they couldn't even, like he did in 2013, call those guys at the State House, have some tea, discuss, and be taken pictures together. That made a lot of difference. People who thought they were enemies realized they were not. They could also, after that, have a conference in Sagana or someplace where you have a leaders' conference, where they set up an agenda. And I say, we agree on certain things, these are the things we don't agree about, then discuss as a country, without having to wait for an end to come. Like he said, we don't need anybody, foreigners to come. But, most important, that business of saying we don't recognize is what the problem is. Because, first of all, they must recognize. Because I can't talk to you if you don't recognize my president. They must recognize the president as the president. I'm not going to be sworn in on the 12th. Well, from there, then we can proceed. And that would be very helpful.
Steve?
Hussein, let me reiterate that the greatness of this country, to a significant extent, will depend on its ability to resolve its questions around and its questions and contestations in a timeous manner and in a manner that does not require external assistance. Once we capture that, then I would like to communicate the president about 4 issues quickly. Number 1, to address this issue of inclusiveness. Inclusiveness necessarily means the people who did not participate in this election, let there be some form of communication on how their issues can be addressed. And that's all I'm saying, and we can't neglect that. The second level of inclusiveness is what Honorable Babu Namwamba is talking about in terms of special interest groups, in terms of marginalized communities. He must also capture that. Number 2, minimum compliance with the law, and this talks about Uhuru's legacy. In this second term, already he has started on, this is a false start because we saw the kind of police brutality going on yesterday. I think he must speak out against it, and he must act decisively in terms of directing cabinet secretaries and people who are involved in the order of governance to observe a certain level of compliance with constitutional standards, starting with the president himself. Number 3, tackle corruption. You know, Hussein, these are the preconditions for development that he's talking about. Before we can discuss how we want to develop the country, the superstructure, the infrastructure, can we deal with the bare minimum? Kenya's rating is at number 145 out of 183 in the corruption perception index. If he's able to lower that and improves Kenya's perception to, let's say, top 50, he will have succeeded. That issue, and generally, observance of human rights, in my view, has even taken a bigger and deeper beating as in comparison to pre-2010, when you have a constitutional framework that requires a more robust adherence to the standards set by the Constitution in terms of respecting rights, especially the freedom to life. We have seen, and personally I saw the photos circulating yesterday about people being shot aimlessly, at women being battered, you know, and humiliated and indignified. These are the critical issues that the president must deal with decisively in the first 100 days. In the first 100 days, if he loses the opportunity to reach out, because our Constitution requires a consultative, deliberative, and negotiated approach to governance. Part of that architecture requires we bring to closure. Closure was not brought at the Supreme Court. There are some outstanding issues we must bring to closure in the first 100 days, for instance. After that, then now we can look forward, what is the Jubilee Manifesto? What does he intend to do, and begin to hold him accountable from that moment going forward.
Okay, Babu.
First of all, Hussein, the world is applauding Kenya. And as I said at the beginning, the world is applauding Kenya because there is a relief. A lot of people who also look at Kenya as being really a pivotal steps in these, geopolitically speaking, are happy that this country has reached some closure. The US has just congratulated the president and his deputy, and they are also urging that we move forward together as a nation, which then brings me to the question of then how do we move together as a nation? Number 1, there is a need to acknowledge, as I have said repeatedly, that this contest is now over. it would be very good, just the same way that the president has repeatedly said, he's extending an olive branch. He wishes everybody to move in the same direction and drive the country forward. I would urge Raila Odinga to drop this headline stance of I don't recognize, and number one, recognize that Kenya now has a president, and this is the president of all Kenyans. Number two, NASA really needs to denounce this culture of violence and hooliganism, and that we can only resolve issues by going at each other's throats. When you talk, for instance, when Ogola says that there are certain people who did not vote, Hussein, the environment that was created in the areas where people did not vote was toxic. People were threatened, people were intimidated, people were beaten up. IEBC officials were being flushed out of hotels where they were training, preparing for elections, and it was a horrible thing.
Back to my question. So what structure of talks, what would you want to see with this reaching out?
That structure must be within the vision the president has set for the nation. Because we must recognize that he is the president of this republic. He has a vision. He has an agenda to implement over the next 5 years. This engagement must be within that vision. The president has an agenda, and he's saying, I want this agenda to be inclusive. I want this agenda to drive the country forward. He's talking about reforms in the education sector. He's talking about driving this country forward on all human development indicators, whether it is in healthcare, it is in infrastructure development. He has set very clear beacons of where he sees Kenya in the next 5 years. Let us engage in that context. And if, for instance, our concern is on form of government, where people feel maybe the system we have today is not inclusive enough, or because we went for presidentialism. Some people are saying perhaps we should revert back to parliamentarism, or maybe even a cocktail, a hybrid of the two systems. That can be a conversation that then takes place within that context. But you cannot say you don't recognize this president, you don't agree with the ruling of the Supreme Court. Basically, you are undermining the constitutional order. So which context will you want to engage if you don't want to engage within that constitutional order? I believe there is a platform. There is goodwill from the president. The president has done it before. He's willing to do it again. Now it is up to the opposition.
I think that the need for talks has always been there, and even as far back as 2014, the president acknowledged that that needs to be done. The advantage that President Uhuru Kenyatta has now is that he will not be seeking another term of office, so he can do some of the difficult things that needed to be done, some of the issues that need to be addressed. We have several outstanding issues that need to be addressed. Some of them are contained within the TJRC report. It would be prudent for him to begin to implement some of the recommendations from these reports that seek to bring closure to Kenyans. I think one of the key issues that the president must address is the national values and principles of governance, particularly with regard to ethics and integrity in public office. He talked about faceless bureaucrats yesterday, but we really do need to see the president clamp down on corruption. And this corruption is not just corruption within the political class, it is corruption that is literally eating the fabric, eating away at the fabric of this nation. There has been a proposal for national dialogue to bring the different sectors together. I think that this is a proposal that the president must embrace, because it allows for him to be able to speak to a wider cross-section. Let this dialogue not be centered on what the political class want, because since 2007, we have had talks that are centered on the political class that obviously do not address those underlying issues. So I think a wider scope of this national dialogue, bringing the different sectors together so that each one can actually speak to the issues that each sector feels that need to be addressed, underlying issues that need to be addressed. And this is something that the president can do quickly. Of course, I am disappointed that I didn't hear the president say anything about the gender rule, which has been outstanding 7 years down the line, a key commitment from 2013 where he promised that he would, spearhead the enactment of the legislation. I really do expect to see the president move to ensure inclusivity, particularly of the groups that have been excluded: women, youth, persons with disability. That sense of inclusion, even the perception of that inclusion, I think is very important. And also to address the underlying issues, that the bottlenecks that are not allowing for devolution to work at its optimum. So these are just some of the basic issues that the president can address. And if he can begin to start talking to Kenyans and communicate to Kenyans, I think it will begin to release some of the pressure that is being created and generated by the crisis. But for me, I think he should move swiftly to bring together the dialogue. There are already groups that have been, trying to put together some kind of dialogue. This is something that the president must embrace and call in also the political actors. But let Kenyans also speak. This thing should not be dialogue between politicians for the purposes of creating positions. Okay. We need to address the underlying issues, and the president must commit to following through on the commitments that are made. Because, when you're negotiating, when you're in dialogue, you want to know that you are speaking to somebody who is trustworthy. So he must display his trustworthiness by following through on some of the things that will be agreed upon.
Finally, Charles.
Yes, I think, Hussein, the president is going to serve the last 5 years in office. He will be keen to secure a legacy. And what type of legacy he will leave behind will depend on how he navigates around the conflicts, the internal conflicts that have emerged from the so-called divisive nature of our politics. And I think it's so critical that the president, although others say a chapter has closed, in this country, once one chapter closes, another chapter opens. Now, what we are going to start seeing from tomorrow, from yesterday, will be something called the Uhuru succession. And that will be another political going on for another 5 years. The president has the authority, the president has the mandate to take the lead in whatever he will do to secure his legacy, make Kenyans more secure, make Kenyans more optimistic about their future. So that all the issues that he has talked about, that he addressed yesterday, and other simmering issues that have gripped this country over the electoral periods, cannot continue being swept under the carpet. So they can come out, be resolved. Each person in Kenya feels the right to certain privileges that they enjoy. But the politicians in this country need to come to the reality that it is not exclusively politicians who should guide the destiny of this country.
All right. That is Vitalis Usebe, is a journalist, also political analyst, former head of news of KTN and KBC, and also deputy director of former COE, that is Committee of Experts on the Constitution. Babu Namwamba is advocate of the High Court, former cabinet minister, former MP Budalange Mdani, human rights advocate. Steve Ogola is also an advocate, a lawyer, and Muteki Njau, a regular panelist. Thank you so much for making time for us this morning, and thank you for watching Cheche. I'm Hussein Mohammed as well, sitting in for Udwak Amimo. Have a good day.